Episode 50. Hello, thanks for tuning in to this special midweek episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight is Gary Wiggins. Gary, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
How you doing?
Oh, doing great. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
My name's Gary Wiggins. I grew up here in East Texas. Spent a lot of time around the Sam Houston National Forest, the Big Thicket, over in Liberty County along the Trinity river bottoms, and the upper reaches of San Jacinto River. And been an archaeologist by trade for, I guess, 30 plus years, and been involved in a lot of interesting excavations of historic and prehistoric sites all across the country. Some as far afield as Colorado, Utah, Wyoming. I worked up there for a while for Century Research back in the early 80s, and that's, I guess, pretty much what I've done all my life. You know, I've been involved over doing work at the San Jacinto battlefield, working for the state. And also, I worked with the famous singer, songwriter Phil Collins, drummer for the rock group Genesis. He was involved in, and he's always been real interested in Texas history and Texas Revolution. And he asked me to be involved in a dig he had going on under a building that he had bought that was adjacent to the Alamo. And they found a lot of interesting artifacts and things pertaining to the siege of the Alamo. And I'm actually even pictured in a book he came out with called The Alamo and Beyond, you know, The Collector's Journey. So that's the whole ball of wax right there.
Well, that's really interesting. I didn't know that about Phil Collins being that interested in archaeology. Tonight's show is going to focus mainly on the Sam Houston National Forest. You mentioned the Sam Houston. What can you tell us about that place?
Well, Sam Houston National Forest has always been an intriguing place for me. It's a fairly large park or forest that stretches. It's kind of I guess a kidney shaped, or, well, that's maybe not quite it's kind of I'd say a horseshoe shaped area that stretches across two counties, or, you know, at least touches two counties. And there's a lake called Lake Conroe, which a good portion of the lake is actually inside the national forest. It's kind of a protects that watershed. The water goes on down and furnishes water for the city of Houston. The forest itself is pretty vast. They have a 100-mile long hiking trail or nature trail that goes from one end of the forest to the other, and there's some really nice developed campgrounds that the park has put in there. Some that overlook the lake and others that do not, you know. Some that are kind of primitive, and then others that are fairly well modernized with water tap and electrical outlets and all that kind of stuff, public bathroom, stuff like that. And it has a really large population of wild game. There's deer that can be seen there, and mountain lions, various other things, lots of wild hogs. So on the one hand, it can be a peaceful place when you go there, but it also has a kind of a dark side to it, you know, a kind of a hostile side to it that I can say that everything in that forest will either bite you, stab you, or stick you.
You know, if it wasn't for that dark, dangerous side of the park, it would be one heck of a place to go. Unfortunately, you can't have one without the other, so.
Right, absolutely, you know. it's a fun place to explore. When I was younger, we started out Boy Scout trips up there, and then that graduated into actually going with my friends, going on deer hunting trips. And in the early days, there wasn't a lot of rules and regulations. So, heck, if we had a Jeep or a vehicle and wanted to strike off through the woods, we'd find somewhat of a trail. It wouldn't be necessarily a road. We'd just strike off back in there and just find us a place to camp and just have a whale good time. But now they've really tightened their belt on allowing you to do some of that kind of stuff. You got to stick to established roadways, and there's some areas that they've made off limits to camping or whatever. Sometimes you have to kind of check in with the park headquarters and find out what's off limits and what's not off limits,
Well, there's not a controversy behind every tree, but considering what's happened in and around that park, it sure does make you wonder why they've deemed some areas to be off limits. But that's all stuff that we can get into later on in the show. Now, I know you had an encounter in 1977 there, Gary. We're going to cover that later on in the show, but before we get into that, have you had any other interesting experiences there in the park?
I've been into the park several times with my friend Mike Woolley, and we've had several encounters with Bigfoot-like creatures. We had one that we think was a juvenile that shot across the road in front of us, broad daylight. It was on all fours when it went across, kind of a dark reddish brown color. Had a kind of a roundish head. We only saw a glimpse of it, but there was a large herd of deer that we saw that was actually on the side of the road and crossed in front of us, and in a somewhat of a hurry. And there was like a bridge, small bridge, or some kind of little creek or something. A little bridge went across there, and it was kind of a state highway there. And this thing shot across the road after the deer. It could very well have been a Dogman, or it could have been a squatch. We didn't get to really see it. It moved so fast. This thing was hunkered down close to the road. I mean, it just like lightning went across. But it wasn't a hog. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote or any other animal like that. This one had large hindquarters or legs, and a rounded head, and it looked far different than anything we'd seen out there. Sure, it certainly wasn't a deer. The other experience we had was we were given a tour by Bob Garrett and his son, and we went down to the tore up camp. And when we arrived on the scene, Bob was giving everybody kind of a tour around the actual site of the camp. And my knee was giving me a lot of trouble. I hurt my knee some time back. And so I stayed with my truck, and Mike's wife was with us. She stayed back with their vehicle, and we were just kind of talking, the two of us. And I just, at that particular point, I had just an extreme, eerie feeling. I don't know how to explain it other than just a sensation that something wasn't right. And I took several photographs in various directions. Bob and Mike and his son and another woman had traveled down the trail leading south away from the door of camp, kind of back in that area. And I turned around 190 degrees, and I shot across the front of my pickup truck, took a picture. And in this photograph, you can clearly see a face or a head looking out in a real thick bunch of vegetation about 50 feet behind us. And then there's several other black discolorations or whatever showing through in that vegetation. And Yeah, it's very obvious. You can see the face of this thing, but I thought it was his body showing through, and he was extremely tall. Mike Woolley sent that photograph to a guy that does analysis of photographs. He's got some kind of computer program that examines the picture pixel by pixel, basically. Vegetation produces a certain color, and animal life produces a certain color and all. And where he didn't say, yeah, that's a Bigfoot, he said there's something there. He said more than that, there's like 4 or 5 somethings there. And he says they're all looking out through that vegetation at me, you know. And then, I mean, it made me to the point to where I got nervous. I had broke my rule when I go into a place like this. Now this, to get to where this area is shoot, it's 5 or 6 miles back in there and off of any kind of road. And it just dead ends, and I had parked my vehicle facing at the end of the road or the cul-de-sac. You never do that. I always, when I go into a place like that, I always immediately turn my vehicle around, because if you have to get out of there in a hurry, you don't want to be having to turn your vehicle around. And I even, in my nervousness, I even actually backed into a tree, turning the thing around, you know. And of course, on the way out, I only got a glimpse of it, but on the way out, there was like 3 vehicles were spaced out because of the dust. It was a very dry day. Bob and them were in the front, was in the vehicle ahead of us. They stopped up on the ridge. They stated they actually saw a Bigfoot actually stepped out along this ridge and was standing there looking at him, you know, watching him. And I'm several car lengths back, and I got a glimpse of something that looked large and dirty and black, and it just kind of stepped behind a tree, but it was moving kind of up to the top of the ridge, or it was kind of going up to where Bob and them saw it, I guess. So I just saw a slight movement there, you know. And but that was our experience that day when we went back in there. Camping in the Sam Houston National Forest, and we're talking about going back in the days when I was in the Boy Scouts and stuff. We used to go to some clear cuts up there where they had done some logging, and you know, there'd be 20 or 30 or 40 of us, and you know, at nighttime the woods just become very active, you know, and there's howls and screams and things that go on out there in the woods that just scare the pants off of you, you know. If you've ever watched the movie Jurassic Park, where the anthropologist and the 2 kids, they end up spending the night in the jungle with all those prehistoric monsters running around. In the background, you can hear all the sounds and all that. It's very reminiscent of what you see on TV. I mean, there's stuff out there that make noise that, man, you just, you wring your hands and say, what in the world, you know, maybe I shouldn't be out here, you know. And surely not be out there without a gun, I can tell you that.
I can only imagine. Now, in 1977 there, Gary, you had that encounter I alluded to earlier. Please tell us about what happened.
It was about, I would say, I'm trying to think, it was around, I'm trying to remember, April or May. I had a girlfriend that liked to go camping, but she hadn't done it a lot. And we decided, I had found a place, I guess a year before, I kind of scouted it out, but there's a highway that transects the Sam Houston National Forest and actually crosses over Lake Conroe, which is a pretty good sized lake. And right before you get to the bridge that actually goes over the lake like you're heading west, there was some people had roughed a trail. I wouldn't call it a road, but it was wide enough you could get a vehicle in there. But there was a kind of a trail that went back in the woods. There's a kind of a little bluff there. And it went back about a mile, and then it turned and ended on the edge of the bluff overlooking Lake Conroe, and it was kind of a clearing there. And you could tell that other people had been there fishing in the past. And there was a remnant of campfire there, ashes and stuff. So it was right about dark, and I had a little Montgomery Ward camp trailer and a Toyota Land Cruiser, 4-wheel drive Toyota Land Cruiser, about a 73 model. And we decided that we were going to camp out back in there. You call it a little wilderness camping, if you want to call it that, Well, we drove back there, and I turned the vehicle around, and the sun was going down, and we hadn't popped the camper up yet. Those little Montgomery Ward camp trailers back in the day, they had a door along the side. You drop it down, and there was a lot of storage up underneath. And, we'd pulled 2 or 3 chairs out. It had got dark, and I had 2 battery-powered lanterns that I turned on. And I was in the process of pumping up a Coleman lantern, and I think we'd gathered a little firewood around. We hadn't started a fire yet, and my girlfriend was sitting there. And in the woods, especially Sam Houston National Forest, at night, it gets real busy. If you're near water, you hear the frogs and crickets and as well as other noises. There's something always going on in the woods. There wasn't much moonlight, if any at all. There was a reflection. You could see some light over the lake. It wasn't just totally dark. You could look out over the lake. But when you look into the woods, it's just pure blackness. You had to look up toward the top of the trees, and there was a little light filtering through. You could kind of see up the top of the trees and stuff. But it gets dark. When it gets dark in the Sam Houston National Forest, it gets dark. It gets dark quick. And so we had our lanterns going. I was pumping up a third one, and we're sitting there talking and doing the usual chores, And the good thing was I hadn't popped that camper up, hadn't folded it up yet. It was still attached to my truck. And all of a sudden, everything went dead quiet. It was like there was no wind, no crickets, no frogs, nothing. And I looked at my girlfriend. She looked at me, and I said, that's kind of weird. Kind of looked around, just silence. And then I heard a crash and then a bang and then a crash and a bang. I mean, real loud. It literally like you were taking those trees out there and just breaking them off or pulling them out of the ground, And we heard something that the only way I can describe it was kind of like a cackle. And then more crashes and bangs, and then something started to, it was like a steamroller or a cement truck, or it was something started, just seemed to be charging through the brush, and it was real thick on various parts around the camp. I mean, there were thick briars and bushes, and the trees themselves were really close together, and whatever it was coming at us. You could literally hear it snorting and breathing, and it was like you part grass. If you go through really deep grass, you can almost see the trees being pushed aside. And my girlfriend, to this day, we're still friends. She always said that she always felt safe with me, but she said when she saw fear in my eyes, she was terrified. And I just looked at her and I said, we gotta go now, And that was the quickest I think I've ever broke camp. We just grabbed our chairs, and I don't even think I turned the lanterns off. We just shoved them into that camper and slammed the door, and I bailed over the top of the tongue and jumped in my Land Cruiser, and she got in on the other side. We fired it up, took off, and I didn't stop till I hit pavement. We were just so frightened.
Do you think that was a Dogman or a Sasquatch that came at you that night?
Really, I can't be for sure because I didn't actually visually see it, but after hearing other people's encounters, I think there's a good possibility it could have been a Dogman. I've heard of other people up there in and around Sam Houston National Forest encountering these things over the years, and they seem to be more violent than maybe I can't say more violent. I mean, Mike's encounter with a Bigfoot over in Louisiana was pretty frightening in itself, where two of them chased him out of the woods when he was deer hunting. So I would say that there's a very good possibility that could have been a Dogman. I heard that there was other people that have actually been attacked around Sam Houston National Forest by these things, what they described as wolf appearance. So it could very well have been just, I didn't stick around long enough to actually see it. My friend Mike told me had I waited around another 4 or 5 minutes, it was going to get very interesting for me. And heck, what it was doing was enough for me to send me packing. I'm just glad my Jeep cranked up, didn't leave me afoot.
Yeah, that would be a bad situation, having to spend the night in there with that thing, whatever it was. I do notice some similarities between what happened to you that night and Kirk Stokes' encounter that he talked about having in 1991.
I had heard his interview and just some of the similarities. The fact that he was on a lake and I was on a lake, and I think he made mention where there was a period of time there where things just kind of went quiet for him, and it's anybody's guess what it was, but we don't have any bear to speak of. There might be a few little honey bears that they've released out there. They're very, very small, but they don't break trees off 6 feet above the ground. They don't shove them out of the way or rip them out of the ground. They definitely, when they come to the woods, don't sound like a steamroller coming through there. I mean, what was coming at us was literally just mowing brush, vegetation down, just shoving it out of their way. And it was extremely angry, whatever it was. You could sense that. It did not want us there. I know just south of there, along the lake, an instance here about, I guess about 4 years ago, a canoeist, there was a group of people canoeing on the lake, and the guy canoeing, he had beached his canoe there, not that far away from where I had attempted to camp that night in 1977. Now, this is more recent though. And he went into the woods, and after a little while he didn't come out. And the other people that were with him, they beached their canoes, and they yelled for him. They went into the woods a little ways. They couldn't find him, so they went and got the authorities. The authorities came back, and they did a search, and they found him several hundred yards back in there. And from what I was told, he was disemboweled, and his arms and legs had been pulled out of their sockets. I believe even his head was pulled off. So, and so the story goes, well, it was he encountered some kind of a wild animal. It was a wild animal attack, and they left it at that. But it's just kind of odd, I've seen mountain lions that's killed deer and one thing and another, and they may maul something, but they don't pull their arms and legs off. So is that Bigfoot doing that, or is that a Dogman? That's anybody's guess, but there's a distinct possibility it could have been a dog, especially when there's known accounts of sightings of Dogman, in the area over the years. So, and I will understand they can be very violent, maybe even more so than Bigfoot.
That whole disemboweling thing seems to be one of their trademarks. When you told me about how the guts had been taken out, that made me think instantly that it could very well have been a Dogman that did that, unfortunately. that's not the only incident in that area in the Sam Houston that you know about and you've told me about consequently. There was another incident where people saw a dogman chasing a Bigfoot. Could you tell us about that?
The story, as it was related to me, was there was a group of people that were doing some research in the area, but they had a camp set up and a pretty good little campfire going. And all of a sudden, they said this juvenile Bigfoot comes running through it. I guess on all fours. It went right through the fire and right on out the other side of the camp. Almost knocked their fire out. And they heard a snarl or something, and they turned around and right on the edge of the camp, they said there was a dog man. He was 7-8 foot tall, standing there, and they were all armed. They opened up on it. It screamed and ran off into the brush. They know they hit it, but when they went to look, there was no blood. And the next day, they couldn't find any blood. So that seems to be a kind of a common denominator too when people run into these dogmen. If they shoot it, there doesn't seem to be any blood. You can hurt the thing, but nobody ever comes up with any blood.
That is a really hard one to figure out, but stack it on the list of other things like that we just don't have answers to and are really hard to figure out. Moving on, do you know about any other dogman encounters in that area, whether we're talking about the Sam Houston or the Davy Crockett National Forest?
Well, actually, both. There in Montgomery County, I was told of a story by a couple that lives near Cold Springs, which borders one side of the Sam Houston National Forest there. But they said they had a cousin or a sister-in-law who were coming back home. This was in broad daylight, and they passed by a historic cemetery in the area, and she noticed what she described as a dog man. It seemed to be standing in the cemetery while he was leaning up against a headstone. Some of the old historic cemeteries, they have those upright headstones that are 6-7 feet tall and made out of marble. And it seemed to have one foot actually on the base of the headstone. And, her husband had slowed down. They got a pretty good look at it. It was glaring back at them. And, but then they kind of got frightened and he sped on off, at a high rate of speed. They didn't wait around at all. But, that was one of the stories. And another story I heard was actually over in the Davy Crockett National Forest where, a couple was on their way to Houston. They were actually coming down from, I think they had a home up in East Texas somewhere, probably up toward Marshall, Tyler, or someplace up that way. And they'd come down and they were cutting through a portion of Sam Houston National Forest to get over to the interstate. I think they turned down the wrong road. It was a dirt road. And they stopped and turned around. They were sitting there looking at a map. She had her window down. They heard some noise or movement in the brush to her left. And this is in broad daylight. And what was described as a dog man just stepped out of the brush. And from the way the story goes, it looked as surprised as she was, or they were. When they looked over at it, it was like, what in the heck is this? And then it made a move toward her. She had the window down on her truck, and she sped off. And she said she looked in the rearview mirror, and it was standing right there where they had been parked. Kind of snarling at them. As they drove off at a high rate of speed.
Yeah, I think I would have left a number 11 on the road too if that had happened to me.
Well, I definitely wouldn't want to shake hands with it.
Wasn't there another encounter where a friend of yours had a daughter who ran into one?
Yeah, that was over in Liberty County, which, if you look at a map, you have, along the Trinity River over there, you have what they call Trinity River Game Preserve. It stretches, it's this fairly wide area of wilderness and swamp, and it stretches north above Liberty, the town of Liberty, and actually adjoins a huge area of both big thicket preserve and private land. It's just literally vast miles of nothing but deep forest. And that actually goes on up to near Cleveland, and actually there's woods that actually tie that area in with the Sam Houston National Park. So it's kind of a big, vast area of forest, wilderness, natural area. But she was coming back from a little town called Anahuac, was heading up to Liberty where she lived, and it was about 7 miles south of the town of Liberty on the little state highway there, and it was getting right at, the sun was pretty close to setting. It was right at dusk, and she had a little compact car, a small vehicle, and she had her son with her, and this thing shot across the road in front of her. She almost hit it. She had to really bear down on the brakes to keep from hitting it. And her son was hollering at her, hit it. But she was afraid. This thing was as big as her car, She was afraid that if she hit it, she'd wreck her car, And of course, when she squalled her tires, the thing looked at her. She said it looked at her with the most glaring, evil eyes she'd ever seen. And the odd thing was it had a small pig or piglet in its mouth as it went across. And of course, then when it hit the other side of the road, it stood up, stepped over a fence, and kept going. And she said that she didn't really know what she was looking at. She didn't know anything about Dogman, but she said that the color of the hair and the facial features and all reminded her of a hyena. These things that look kind of like a dog in Africa. It looked like a giant hyena or something. And it just scared her. Matter of fact, she said her son that was riding with her, he was like 14 years old at the time, and he used to go deer hunting all the time with his dad and all that, but it changed his life. He don't even like to go out in the woods anymore. It just scared him.
Yeah, when you see something like that, it's so hard to conduct business as usual out in the woods. That's totally understandable there. Do you know of any other Dogman encounters in Sam Houston or surrounding areas?
I'm trying to think. There was a story years ago where he had a small farm or ranch or whatever that adjoined the Sam Houston National Park, and I was told that late one night his livestock was just really raising cane, and he had a shotgun with him in a light, a very strong battery-powered light. This is probably 30 years ago, whatever, and he went out, evidently the cattle, he had a small pasture up closer to the house, and he went out and shined the spotlight across, the cattle. He thought maybe there was some coyotes or something in the area that was, his cows were cutting up, mooing, and you could tell they were actually agitated. And when he panned his spotlight across there, supposedly he saw what looked like, he said, it looked like a wolf on two legs, that stood, about 8 foot tall. And, of course, he said that, he had to use both hands to shoot that. He said he dropped the light and fired his shotgun in that direction, And he had like no barrel 12 gauge. He actually fired both barrels in that direction, and he never knew if he hit it or not, He picked the light up, went back in the house, and I don't think he went back out until the next day, And of course, there was no evidence of it. I never asked the people that told me the story. I never asked if he had gone out and tried to locate any tracks, But tracks have been found in and around Sam Houston National Forest, which some people attribute to a dogman. I have there's another guy I know. We're not close friends. I just know him. I've met him several times, and he's had numerous Bigfoot experiences in and around Sam Houston National Forest, and has made a lot of castings of tracks up there. And he's found some pretty interesting stuff. They find 3-toed tracks as well as a regular 5-toed Bigfoot type tracks. And some of them are just really enormous, up to 22.5 inches or so long. Just mind-boggling. What's out there? That's the big thing. But evidently, there's numerous varieties of these creatures out there. I know over near Cold Springs, which is another area of Sam Houston National Forest, they have accounts over there all the time. Locals encountering what they call hairy giants out there, and there's people coming up missing from time to time, at various places, especially along that Lone Star hiking trail, which is just really odd. People, some of them were very well versed with the woods, and how to handle yourself. Some of them aren't. And they go out there, and you just don't ever see them again. They just disappear, and then authorities bring in dogs and professional trackers and all. And a lot of times they find absolutely nothing. Sometimes they may find a backpack, or they may find an abandoned tent, but literally they just disappear.
How long have people been disappearing in that area?
I would say for years. I don't know exactly, but I imagine if you've been keeping records, there's probably records of people disappearing going back to the turn of the century, I would say. And maybe before, who knows, they've all been attributed to one thing or another, but very strange indeed. I know I personally seen back in the woods, stapled to a tree, laminated kind of wanted posters, have you seen missing, this individual. They have a picture of him, the description and all that, But, there's been campers and hunters. It wasn't too long ago, there was up near one of the big campgrounds that's actually manned. They actually have a ranger where you check in, they have to pay, to go camp there, and they have actually developed campsites where you can park your RV. And there's a portion of the Lone Star Trail that swings down by it, and you have access to that nature trail. And like a 15-year-old girl, she struck off on her own. Nobody's ever seen her again. They haven't been able to find her. So, that's just one of those strange phenomenons, It's almost kind of like you see in David Paulides' books, Missing 411, the same thing has been occurring down here in and around the Sam Houston National Forest. People just come up missing under really odd circumstances, Some of it can be explained to, some kind of mishap. But a lot of it can't be explained. And it's hard to explain when you don't find the body, But you can call it natural causes, or you can call it, some kind of wild animal got them. Whatever kind of wild animal. We do have hogs that are fairly dangerous down here, wild hogs, which run in groups. You might see 20 or 30 of them in a pack. Or you might just see a few of them. 3 or 4 or 5 in a pack, and they can be very dangerous. And you have your bobcats and your mountain lions, but generally, they keep their distance. if you strike off by yourself, you might be singled out as a potential food, I guess. I don't know. But I know I wouldn't go back in there by myself, and I dang sure wouldn't go back in there unarmed, a lot of people that go hiking, you enjoy nature, become one with nature and all that kind of stuff. They really don't have a good understanding of what's out there, I know of another account of the individual. They actually have a Lone Star hiking trail club, and the trail itself extends for right at 100 miles, and he actually left his vehicle near what they call the Huntsville State Park, and went up the Lone Star Trail into the Sam Houston National Forest, all the way as far as Lake Stubblefield. And when he did it on the way in, he actually dropped off and off the trail and hid, bottles of water and little things like that. So on his return run, he'd have little way stations. And something got into on his way back. I noticed he had posted on the internet, but something on the way back had got into every one of his little stashes of water bottle and had ripped them open, He said he just barely did make it to the Stubblefield campground where they actually have water hydrants, where he could get get water, but it was almost like something didn't want him to make it back out of there, was getting his stashes, But I know near the Stubblefield campground, where the campground there's a bridge crossing down there, and people that fish along that bridge at night have had things thrown at them and have mentioned of strange screams and howls and stuff back in the woods, to the point where it unnerves them. They end up getting all their fishing gear and leaving. They say, that's enough for me. It seems to be a little inhospitable here,
Yeah, it does sound like a really spooky place. If someone you knew told you that they were thinking about taking a camping trip to the Sam Houston, what would you have to say to them?
I would say, number one, never go by yourself anywhere. Always have one or more people with you. Number two, I would go armed. If you have some kind of firearm, I would keep it with you. Never venture out of camp at night. I would stay pretty close to the fire at night. If you have a tent or whatever. Myself, after my experiences, I don't tent camp. I realize there's something bigger than me out there, and I think when you venture off on your own, you're adding yourself to the food chain. And I would have to have a self-contained camper to feel comfortable out there. Is what I can tell you. But it's a fun place in the daylight. But when that sun goes down, it becomes an entirely different place. Almost a Jurassic Park-like environment or Jurassic World. And the big thing is you can't see. But whatever is out there, they can see you. They seem to have the ability, like so many animals, to see in the dark. And unless you have some kind of special night vision or something, these things can creep up pretty close to you and be on top of you without you even knowing it. I just say be on your guard, be watchful, and be aware of what's around you, because there's other dangers out there. There's some pretty good sized rattlesnakes, there's pretty good sized cottonmouth water moccasins out there, all of which kill for a living. If you especially get up around that water, which water draws other animals, which is game, which is food for whatever's out there, I don't care what it might be, whether it be a bobcat or mountain lion, which we do have a number of them out there. But again, you get near water, you're gonna have poisonous snakes, and you just got to be careful, because one of those bites you, and you're in serious trouble. And if you're off by yourself and a good ways away from, say, you're hiking and you're a good ways away from a vehicle, it may kill you. You may not make it out of there alive. Hogs, if you break a leg or whatever, hogs come in there and they'll actually devour you. They don't care. They attack each other. They eat their own young sometimes. These wild hogs have invaded Texas, and they're actually becoming a nuisance to the point to where there's some places where they're actually going up helicopter and hunting them from helicopter for sport. I guess the better ones, they haul out for a very good barbecue.
Because of your encounter there, Gary, you mentioned not being able to camp out in a tent, but what other kind of changes have you made, and what other kind of things that you used to do can you no longer do?
Oh, well, I used to be able to walk out there in the middle of the night when I was younger. Now that I know what I know, I won't just blatantly walk through I was actually at risk. I was putting my life on the line going out there by myself. Of course, when you're young, you feel like you're bulletproof and 10 foot tall. And you thought, well, the most you got out there is a bobcat or mountain lion or something like that. We've actually got more mountain lions out there now than we've had in years, mainly because in the past we had a drought in West Texas, and we had a series of wildfires that drove a lot of the mountain lions east into East Texas. And there's plenty of game, plenty of cover, and they stayed. But basically, I just don't feel safe in a tent. We can be out there, you can have 5 or 6 well-armed people with you, and I still, I get nervous when the sun goes down. When that sun gets close to the horizon, I'm heading home or into a motel. I don't have the confidence I once had when I was younger. When you're 16, 17, 18 years old, you weren't scared of anything. One time, me and 2 other fellas, we drove a good distance back into the Sam Houston National Forest. We had a Volkswagen van, and that was one of those scenarios where when I stopped for the night, I should have turned it around. I didn't. And we had a heavy rain, which Texas is known for. Sometimes it'll rain all week long. We get 10, 15 inches of rain. And where I was at turned into a sea of mud. And we spent 3 days literally digging ourselves out and getting the thing turned around. So where we didn't have any encounters with a Dogman or Bigfoot, we were heavily armed. We had forgotten the axe, and I was really using a 12-gauge shotgun with slugs. I think I went through about 10 boxes that I had with me, but literally using a shotgun to blast little saplings down to use to put under the tires of the vehicle, and also to get it turned around, just trying to get it up to some high ground. And we had to use a jack, and they had to jack one end of the Volkswagen up and put stuff under the wheels, and then jack the other end of the panel van up, put stuff under the wheels, and then crank it up, and we'd run it about 30 feet and down to the frame again. And that went on for 3 days. The fact that I was shooting the gun so much, blasting these little saplings and stuff down, I often wonder, and Mike Woolley had suggested that might be, and I think even Bob Garrett I was on one of his radio shows one time, and he even suggested that was probably the reason why we didn't get bothered, because we were blasting our guns so much back there that they were kind of keeping their distance,
Well, they might have been keeping their distance there, Gary, but I guarantee you they were watching the show.
Yeah, I'm sure they were, There was 3 crazy guys back there blasting their guns in the trees, I know when we finally got back up to the Stubblefield campground, they had the people that were camped out there this during hunting season, and they could, for 3 days, I heard the roar of the engine of my van and the constant gunfire going on out there for 3 days. And so they weren't able to get any hunting in either, because we were scaring all the game out of the country, And they were sure glad to see us when we got back to camp. And of course, the van itself was unrecognizable. It was entirely covered with mud. There were just like two little viewing ports out through the windshield, where the windshield wipers had made a kind of a smeary area to look out. And and we'd run out of food. We were so hungry. I remember we drove into Huntsville and we pulled into a Sonic drive-in, and this huge bunch of mud just fell off my bumper onto the ground there. And the girl that came out to service our burger, I mean, she wouldn't get with it. We were all covered in mud. And she handed it to us. She wouldn't get near us, you know. Oh, man.
Yeah, sounds like you guys had one heck of a time out there. One of those situations you're awfully glad to get out of, though, which I can't say I'll blame you there.
That was a mistake. But hey, you know, when you're just a kid, we're talking 1971 here, you know, you do a lot of crazy things, and you later regret. I'm just glad that we didn't have an encounter, even a violent encounter. I mean, we were heavily armed. We would have, I guarantee you, if it had shown itself, if a Bigfoot had got after us or a Dogman had got after us, we may not have killed it, but I definitely would have sent it away with a long winter bellyache. I can tell you that.
I've been hearing about things that have been going on in that park for quite some time now. I'm wondering, do you feel any kind of frustration when you think about the apparent dangers found in that park and the lack of warning the general public gets about those dangers?
Well, yeah, I guess the frustration is that there's something going on out there. There's people that are getting hurt out there, and the total disregard for you know, safety, you know, in the Sam Houston National Forest, you know. And of course, I can't point my finger at the Forest Service so much. It's just, it just seems like that they're I don't know how to explain it. It just seems like that there should be more warning for people that go out there, you know, especially about the dangers in the woods, and what could potentially disrupt their camping experience, and it could very well be deadly. You know, there's a lot of people who say, "Oh, well, you're smoking dope or something." There's nothing out there, but not until you actually see it or have an encounter does that whole frame of mind change. You know, that you suddenly realize that, oh my God, you know, the blinders come off. Another thing you see out of the tree, I used to see it when I was younger all the time out there, but the trees, what they call tree structures, or you see evidence where these things go through, and you see actually trees bent over and broke off, or stacked in funny piles, you know, or groups, you know. When I was younger, I would see all this stuff, and I would think to myself, well, that's kind of odd how the wind did that. But now, after all these years, and seeing photographs and listening to stories of what other people encountered all across the country, whether they're interested in Dogman or Bigfoot, it just suddenly dawns on you that, wow, these things have always been out there, you know. That I remember seeing this stuff before, you know. And it's I don't know how to explain it. It's just you start really getting a kind of a feeling of foreboding, you know. All of a sudden it's like, what's going on here, you know?
Yeah, when you consider all the strange things that are happening and have happened with people turning up missing and whatnot, it just doesn't seem right that more warnings not put out there to hopefully prevent more people from falling victim like others have in the past.
Yeah. Well, you know, the most I've seen is basically the missing persons posters that they put out on the trees. Generally speaking, I've talked to friend of mine that lives up there, Sheila, she says, and she used to work for paramedics in the area. She says generally, a person will come up missing, and it'll be in the newspaper, and there'll be somewhat of a pretty extensive search. Well, when they won't find anything, it's just kind of forgotten, and of course that name of that person goes on to a missing persons report or file, and that's the last you ever hear of it. It's just like, that's it. That's the end of the story, Bob, Garrett, and Tim and them, they've actually come across camps, abandoned, along the Lone Star hiking trail, places back in there. And nobody around. And they'll come back, a week later, and they're still there. It's the way they were left. And something run these people out of there. Now, whether these people escaped alive or whatever, we don't know. But some of these tents are very expensive. We're talking several $100 tents. And people just don't go off and leave all their possessions, especially a tent that they've worked hard at probably buying, But you do find that kind of stuff out there, just abandoned camps,
Speaking of those abandoned camps there, Gary, the most famous one in that area has to be the Torn Up Camp. Do you have any opinions on whether it was a Dogman, a Bigfoot, or what else that was behind that?
I really couldn't tell you as far as, it's a possibility. I'm leaning toward Bigfoot, just from the stories I've heard from various people that were there right after that event occurred. And of course, I, like everybody else, have seen the videos that they had taken, Bob and them had taken, not only the night of that event, but the next morning, and then months later, after the Forest Service had gone in and cleaned up the camp, and removed all evidence of anything occurring, including all the bent over trees and broken branches and stuff, where it looked like something that literally had gone crazy and just devastated the area. There's no evidence of it there anymore, Knowing that there are dogmen in the area, you could go either way with something like that. But, of course, the Torp camp, I would lean to the fact that was probably a Bigfoot. Might have been more than one, I know there's corridors through Sam Houston National Forest that these things travel. I think they travel back and forth, actually, all the way from East Texas, and I think these things probably basically following the food chain, following wherever what would you call it, the best eating facility is. If you got an area where there's a lot of hogs, they'll probably, because they do eat hog, they'll follow the herds, as they wander through the forest. Same thing with the deer. If you find a lot of deer, there's gonna be a Bigfoot nearby, because in my opinion, they're ambush predators.
Yeah, with all that food supply, like you said, it would have to be a smorgasbord for any big predator like that in the area, so that does make good sense.
If you look at the size of a Bigfoot or a Dogman, they are going to have to eat a lot to maintain that body mass. So they're going to stay near whatever the food source is. And if it's deer or if it's wild hogs or whatever it may be, I know some of the Bigfoot creatures, they also eat other, nuts, berries and things like that. That's not necessarily a main course, but that's just kind of an appetizer, so to speak, because of their size, they have to eat a lot, and they have to kill a lot in other words, So they're going to be following, the food wherever it's more plentiful.
Yeah, when you're talking about bodies that big, it would take an awful lot of calories to sate them and keep them going. There's no denying that. Gary, it's about time to wrap this show up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I've enjoyed the program, and your past shows and things I listen to. But I've got really interested in the whole Dogman genre, and I can tell you that's it's fascinating to me. You know, in a lot of ways, I'm glad I haven't come into a face-to-face encounter with one of those things. You know, I don't really know if I want to.
Oh, I know the answer to that. You definitely don't want to have a face-to-face with one of these things. Well, Gary, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and sharing those stories and all that info with us. I really appreciate it.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I really have.
Thanks again. I really appreciate it, and you have yourself a great night.
Okay, maybe we can talk again sometime.
That sounds good. We'll have to do that sometime.
All right.
We'll see ya.
Take care.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.